Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video today where I thought after my kind of initial thoughts on Orphan 55 I'd kind of give it another watch today, have a little bit more of a think about it and kind of decide whether I feel it's actually as bad as maybe I and some commenters made out it to be based on just seeing it for the first time yesterday, because I think it's fair to say it's got quite a negative response from the fans in general and people have thought it's pretty trashy, pretty not necessarily boring, but just kind of not a very good idea, not very well executed, way too political and preachy and all those different things. And so I thought, I've now had another watch of it, I was going to give a little bit more detail and depth into my kind of review of it and also just look at, ultimately, is it a bad episode or not? So yes, I've given it another watch, had another think about it, read lots of your comments. I mean, you guys posted so much on that yesterday's video. I think it was something like 300 comments in the end I had to read of people's different opinions. So it's great to hear what you guys will have to say. There'll be a video coming up later this week about the sort of fan response to Orphan 55, shall we say, which I don't think is going to be quite such a positive video compared to the last couple of weeks with Spyfalls Part 1 and 2. But yeah, this episode, Orphan 55, it's an episode that actually starts reasonably well. I think I quite like the initial setting of this tranquility sort of spa holiday resort place. I think that's quite nice. It looks visually very, very impressive. I think, and throughout this episode, I think it looks pretty good visually. Maybe some of the direction problems come in terms of this sort of, as much as there's some good stuff with showing the dregs off, there's a lot of just cutting to shots of them screaming and making noises and stuff to try and be threatening when we've already seen them 50 times in the episode. It was kind of, I don't know, it just didn't quite, to sort of halfway through you were kind of bored of that sort of shot and felt like, okay, let's have something different now. Let's just try and not film in exactly the same way. We never actually saw them kill anybody, just heard the sound of them killing anybody, which wasn't great. I think one of the biggest problems with this episode is the whole show don't tell idea that the Chris Chibnall era, not necessarily now we've seen just Chris Chibnall, but this whole era in general has suffered from the idea that the characters will tell you something that's happening, but you won't actually see it on screen, so you're not able to buy into it and believe it and be convinced by it. It was a problem in several episodes of Series 11. It wasn't too bad in Spyfall, I didn't notice it so much there. But then in this episode, it just felt like it came back with a vengeance, is probably the best way to put it, where we see the dregs lots. We see lots of them. They're all over the screen, shouting and screaming and whatever, and making sort of creeping up on people, but actually killing people, didn't see it at all. Literally, we just see people being dragged away and then they somehow die or devoured. Maybe it's because it's too gruesome to show, I don't know, but I feel like they should have shown something of that. I think the worst example of this in this episode in particular is the moment when Benny is talking to Vilma through the sort of truck saying, oh, will you marry me and then will you shoot me, and then him dying. And it's like, we are supposed to just believe that he's been captured or whatever it may be by the dregs. It's completely left to our imagination and makes it so much harder to buy into because we don't see him being, I don't know, torn apart by the dregs or just being kind of trapped or dragged by them or anything. There's nothing. There's not a single moment of it. So it just makes it almost impossible to buy into and really care about Benny. I mean, Vilma's just an irritating character. I'm sorry. I know what they're trying to do with her. She's meant to be the sort of old lady who's so distressed by the loss of her husband and just wants him back and is, well, not husband, but partner, and just wants him back and all this, that and the other. And it's like, but actually she just turns out to be really annoying, consistently annoying, and you're not necessarily pleased when she dies, but you really don't care when she dies. Like, it does not feel like a moment that I'm meant to be emotional about, as it is with most of the characters in this episode. Like when Hyphen dies, you're like, oh, okay, they just killed a character off because that's the trope of this genre of TV or version of Doctor Who they're doing. It's sort of disaster movie type Doctor Who. That's what they're doing, and that's just what they've gone for here, and it doesn't work. So I don't know, it just felt like, again, we had this big problem of there was lots of action, but they also just didn't show fundamental things that I felt we needed to see to be able to buy into elements of this story, which was a real shame. In terms of the pacing of this story, I don't think that it's terrible all round. I think it kind of always has its biggest problems at the start and the end of the episode, in that within 3 minutes of the start of this story, we're pretty much thrown straight into, there's a disaster going on, the hopper virus appears, then these dregs appear, and within like 5 or 6 minutes of the start of the episode, we've seen the main villain of the piece and they're attacking everybody and it's all disaster has struck. And where it feels like we've barely even established the world that we're on, apart from a couple of very quick shots of Tranquility Spa in the bar and Graham having a little laying on the sunbed in a little swimming pool. That's it. I know it's not meant to be a massive complex, but it just didn't feel like there was any real mystery to be built up in this story, because literally straight away we're thrown straight into this adventure when it's meant to kind of, you think they'd want to build up to it a little bit more than that. So I thought that was a little bit disappointing and a bit. It feels like you're just not able to build the world that they're trying to around us, not introducing the characters and giving the sort of side characters enough to do in this story by just moving straight into the action part before they've really actually given the side characters anything to do or establish themselves and help us to buy into them when they suddenly then get into perilous situations and ultimately some of them dying. It's by not establishing that groundwork, I think, that makes us not care about the side characters, so it kind of all compounds into each other. And the other problem is the ending, which is a bit bizarre, for want of a better word. It feels like it happens so rapidly and suddenly the episode is over. Like the complex blows up, then out of nowhere Kane reappears. I'm sorry, maybe I missed something. I would love to have missed something. Please do tell me in the comments below if I've simply missed something. But seemingly Bella just shoots the gun, it fails and shoots herself, I think. She falls on the floor, and then suddenly Kane runs out of the mist and starts shooting at the dregs, and suddenly she's back and it's all fine. I was really confused by that. That made very little sense to me. Then they all teleport away, the Doctor has a lecture, and the episode's over, and it's like, boom, done. That was it. And it was sometimes a fast-paced adventure works, and I think that through bulks of this story it's quite good that it's quite fast-paced and keeps moving forward and doesn't kind of have too many slow scenes to kind of slow the whole program down. That does work to an extent, but I feel like it also could have done with a few slower moments during the story, and particularly I think the opening should have just been that bit longer, maybe with a cold opening rather than just going straight into the titles, to give it a bit more of something sort of mysterious to throw into it and then establish the exposition of where we are. Given that Chris, well, I know this is not written by Chris Chibnall, but he has exec produced it, so he'll have had some influence in the story. And Chris Chibnall usually loves expository dialogue, just waffling on about exposition here, there, and everywhere, and it felt like there was like none of that in this story. So I was quite surprised by that, really, and I think that's just one of the various issues that rather lets this story down. But there are things that I do really like about this story. I do like the twist that actually we're on Earth in the future when it's being destroyed by radiation. Obviously, then this brings in the political message, which I think that up until the final speech works quite effectively. It is a sign that this is what could happen if we're not looking after the planet enough, but it does it in a subtle way, just kind of implying things rather than stating them as fact to us, to camera, like Joe did at the end, which is where it all goes wrong. But before that, I genuinely wasn't expecting it to be Earth halfway through. There are a couple of moments where you're kind of maybe thinking, well, maybe it could be, maybe these underground tunnels look a little bit Earth-like, really. That's kind of a little hint, but nothing more than that, I think, to really give that indication. And then suddenly to sort of have that shock twist, kind of like The Mysterious Planet from Trial of Time Lord, among other stories, that have suddenly twisted to find out that actually we are on Earth, and that's what this is. This story is all going to be about global warming and how bad it is on the Earth, and the dregs are actually mutated humans, which is kind of a cool and creepy idea, I think. And the dregs themselves look generally pretty fantastic, properly menacing, even if I say they weren't always shot in the best way, just showing them screaming all the time and running around but not actually doing anything ultimately. Although they do, we don't see it on screen, which is the real frustration. So there are good things in there, as I say, like the dregs, like the whole Earth twist plotline. And actually, I think the Doctor has probably one of her best episodes, Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, in this episode. I feel like she really is sort of a strong presence on screen. It feels like the focus of the story is very much on her, and it isn't kind of pandied off onto the companions throughout this story, like some previous episodes are, where almost the companions get too much to do. And so, well, not that they often do, but sometimes they do, and it leaves that Jodie with not enough maybe to kind of get her teeth into. She doesn't always feel like a convincing authoritative figure. It sort of feels like she's just sort of muddling her way through, hoping for the best. But I felt like in this story she really had plans when she came up with these ideas with the finding out about the dregs and how they breathe carbon dioxide, not oxygen, and how she was going to stop them using that as a way of sort of defeating them, getting them into the cage and everything. I thought that I don't know, I just felt like I bought into Jodie's Doctor quite well in this story, and it felt like she was always a presence, and really felt like she had a plan. She was in control of things, as much as it was all kind of going wrong at times as well. So I just felt like this was a much better episode for the Doctor than we've seen in recent times. I thought there was a little bit of a hint at the very beginning of the episode, which never really got picked up on, was when she said when Ryan, Yaz and Graham will go off to look at different things on Tranquility Spa, and then the Doctor's like, oh, okay, I'll go and have a little explore on my own. It just kind of implied a sense that she feels, despite having her friends around her, she feels a bit alone, maybe in reference to the whole Gallifrey thing from the previous episode. Then it felt like that was never really picked up and taken anywhere. Maybe it would in future episodes, but I felt like that was a very intriguing line that could have really, really been built on something, and it felt like, oh, this is a Doctor who's feeling actually despite being surrounded by her best friends, is actually feeling quite alone because she's lost her people and her planet and all of that. And there's a lot in there, but then it wasn't explored at all. So maybe it'll set things up for future episodes from that point of view, but yeah, I did at least feel like this was a very strong episode for Jodie's Doctor. Ultimately, I don't think there's any way of getting past the fact that the ending to this story lets it down. The final scene with the Doctor giving her lecture about climate change and global warming and about how we need to improve the environment and work together to do it, otherwise it's going to be the end of the world. It's a good message. I appreciate the message and I agree to an extent. Well, no, I do agree, but the problem is the way that it's been portrayed in this final scene when the Doctor's just giving us a lecture on it. I know I said this yesterday and I still kind of agree. I watched it again. It doesn't feel maybe quite as offensive almost as it was the first time round, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like natural and a flowing part of the episode. Even if it was just more of a dialogue between the Doctor and the companions about this, rather than just the Doctor giving one speech about it. I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it works. It just feels like the Doctor's just saying, we need to change how you live, you need to change how you live, you need to live better, because otherwise you're going to turn into dregs and you're going to destroy the Earth, and this is it. So I just found that really unfortunate, because we've had good speeches in the past from doctors about politically-ish things. You think the Zygon inversion, for example, but then it just felt like that was so much better written, better done, not necessarily better acted. I don't think Jodie acted that particularly badly, but I think it was just better fitted into the script and the plot of the story. And as for that episode, as an example, compared to this, where it feels very tacked on at the end. Just waffling on about and telling us that we need to change. It just didn't, it was just, it felt too much for me, too much like a lecture, and therefore it just doesn't, it kind of leaves you with a bad taste, I think, at the end of the episode almost. It kind of puts you off wanting to kind of listen because she's been so, you must do this. So I feel like that's, always going to be the real thing that lets this story down. And although I like the idea of the final shot with us cutting to the Dreg and implying this is what we could become, it just felt such clunky editing in the way it was done. I don't know, it was really weird. It was just kind of Jodie going, oh, and then cutting to a Dreg, making the music kind of really tailed off in a bizarre way, and then such sort of sound effects of roaring as we see a Dreg, and then into the credits, the closing theme. It just didn't work for me. Some of the editing in this episode was just a bit odd. There were weird sort of moments where scenes seemed to like jump quite fast. It felt like they'd cut a lot out of this story, a lot of character moments, a lot of just a lot of kind of a lot of the sort of minute detail was kind of cut out in scenes of this story, maybe to just get it cut down to time. But then it's 4 minutes under what they can really get away with being a 50-minute story, and it's only 46 odd minutes. So it feels like, there's just moments throughout where it feels like we're missing something. Have we lost a scene here? Have we lost a bit of a scene? There's a few lines there, here and there. It just doesn't quite click in that sense. As I've said before, and I'll say again, the side characters were not great in this story. They didn't have much to do. They were, well, I think the problem is they were very not necessarily one-dimensional, but just didn't get enough screen time and establishment as characters for us to have any care at all about them. James Buckley's character of Nebby, I think his name was completely wasted and pointless, and it felt like, why did you cast James Buckley as that character? Like, anybody could have played that character. It literally made no difference. That's just casting somebody who people might have heard of for the sake of it. That's it. Literally, that's it. Laura Fraser's character of Kane was at least had a little bit more interesting character in terms of her being, quite mean throughout most of this story, and then sort of, not necessarily turning good at the end, but then saying that actually, no, she didn't want to just rule this planet. She was trying to get it for her daughter Bella, which was just a bit of an odd twist, I guess, but I'm willing to kind of buy into it, and it at least created a bit of a conflict between the Doctor and Kane when she was really doing things that are pretty bad, pretty morally bad, shall we say. And I quite like that, seeing Jodie as the Doctor getting a bit angrier. I think we need a little bit more of that to see in the future of the series, just seeing her, particularly as we head towards any sort of Gallifrey-related stuff. I think that would be really, really good to see. And the same stuff with Ryan and Bella as well. It was nice to sort of initially establish a little bit of a hint of romance or something along those lines, but then it kind of bizarrely, she kisses him and leaves and it all fizzles out, and it doesn't feel earned necessarily, the kiss at the end, for example. It doesn't feel like we've really had enough time with them to kind of reach that moment, and then suddenly it just happens. One thing that I saw somebody comment about, and I think might be quite interesting, is the idea that actually Yaz is a bit jealous of Ryan and his sort of love interest. Obviously in Spyfall we saw Yaz's sister saying about, or Ryan wanting Yaz's sister's number, and kind of Yaz looking a little bit kind of, I don't know, jealous of him to an extent. And also just the little comment about, well, what are you talking about, Ryan, when the Doctor's asking Ryan and Bella what they were chatting about. I don't know, is it going to set up some sort of romance down the line between Ryan and Yaz, or at least Yaz being interested in Ryan but Ryan not necessarily reciprocating? I don't know, maybe that's a dynamic that we could see coming in future episodes, and therefore means some of this will make a little bit more sense. I don't know. But ultimately, I think, the characters, the side characters in particular, were another of the letdowns of this episode. So yes, as much as I don't really like being massively negative about Doctor Who in general, unfortunately sitting down and doing this again has made me realise that actually this story just isn't really very good. I've titled this, was it really that bad? The answer is not necessarily terrible. Like, it's not like a 2 out of 10 terrible, but it's not a 7 out of 10. It's fairly good. It's a proper 5 out of 10. This is pretty average with some annoying elements to it. It's not an episode I'm going to rewatch particularly often. It feels like something much more out of Series 11 than what we at least established in the first 2 episodes of Series 12, which is a real shame because I thought the show was kind of getting onto a better track with the first 2 episodes, and then it feels like it's just gone back to Series 11 and getting with this episode. Maybe with a little bit more action and excitement, but it still feels a little bit more Series 11. So hopefully the next episode of Series 12 will kind of get us back on track, because we've still had 2 out of 3 good episodes, which is a pretty good strike rate for the first 3 episodes. I'm sure most series of Doctor Who, you'll struggle to find all of the first 3 episodes is very good, whereas we had 2 of those out of 3. So I think that's at least somewhat promising, but hopefully next week's will be a bit more back on track, shall we say. So yes, those are my more kind of thought out thoughts about this episode, having had another watch, another bit more of a think about it, and what I overall thought of it. But I still want to hear from you guys. Lots of you commented yesterday, but if your opinion's changed, or you just haven't had the chance to comment yet, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this episode down in the comments below. I will be doing my video tomorrow, on Wednesday, about what the fans thought of this episode. The soundtrack to it will be up tomorrow night, and then the What Did the Fans Think video will be up on Wednesday, and I'm making reacts on Thursday, so lots to look forward to for the rest of this week. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. As always, hit the like button and the subscribe button, and I'll see you again tomorrow for a brand new video. Goodbye!